At the registration hall of the National Violin Competition, 10-year-old Sophia, soaked from the rain, arrives with a single dream to win and save her mother. But when she places a shoebox full of loose change on the counter, Charlotte, the cold, dismissive judge, gives it one glance, refuses to count it, and bluntly rejects her as unworthy. Just as Sophia, devastated, is about to turn away, a male judge suddenly steps in and insists the fee be checked properly, and his timely intervention is what finally allows her to be registered. That simple act of kindness brings Sophia to the stage, where she plays with all her heart, unaware that this man is about to change her life in a way no one could have imagined. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the glass doors of the Royal Arts Center like it was trying to break in. Inside, everything was the opposite warm lights, soft classical music floating through the air, and kids in fancy clothes who looked like they'd never gotten their shoes dirty in their lives. Then the door opened and Sophia walked in. Water dripped from her oversized jacket onto the expensive carpet. Her violin case, black peeling at the edges, hung from her shoulder like it weighed nothing. She was 10 years old, soaked to the bone, and she walked like she owned the place. Not because she was confident, because she had no choice. The other kids stared. One boy in a tailored suit whispered something to his mother, who pulled him closer, like poverty might be contagious. A girl in a white dress wrinkled her nose at the puddle forming under Sophia's sneakers. Sophia didn't look at any of them. She walked straight to the registration desk. Behind it sat Charlotte Morrison, head judge, donor board member, and the kind of woman who could smile while stabbing you in the back. She wore pearls, real ones. Her fingers were manicured, her posture perfect, and when she saw Sophia approaching, her smile tightened just enough to be polite and cruel at the same time. "Name?" Charlotte asked, not looking up from her clipboard. "Sophia Bennett." Charlotte's pen paused. She glanced at the puddle spreading across her pristine carpet, then at Sophia's jacket, then at the violin case that looked like it had survived a war. "Do you have your registration fee?" "Yes, ma'am." Sophia reached into her jacket and pulled out a shoebox. Not a violin case, a shoebox, held together with duct tape. Charlotte's smile vanished. "The fee is $240. We don't accept." "I have it." Sophia opened the box. Inside were bills. Crumpled ones, 5s, 10s, coins in a Ziploc bag, money that smelled like basement laundromats and corner store cash registers. Charlotte recoiled like Sophia had just opened a box of rats. "I can't accept this. It's unsanitary." "It's money," Sophia said flatly. "You said $240. I have $240. I said we don't accept." "Careful, Charlotte." The voice cut through the room like a conductor's baton. Everyone turned. A man stood near the entrance, rain dripping from his dark coat. Tall, mid-30s, with the kind of presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing it. His eyes were sharp, his jaw set, and when he walked, people moved out of his way. Ethan Cole, maestro, guest judge, legend. He crossed the lobby in 5 strides and placed his hand on the registration form right before Charlotte could push it off the desk. "Don't let prejudice stain a potential talent's application," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. Charlotte's face flushed. "Maestro Cole, I'm simply following protocol." "Protocol?" Ethan glanced at the shoebox, then at Charlotte. "I didn't know we started judging musicians by their wallets. When did that policy change?" Silence. Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a smile. "Of course not. I was simply concerned about the counting process." "Then let my assistant count it." Ethan gestured to a young woman with a tablet. "Every bill, every coin. If it's $240, we accept it. That's the rule, isn't it?" Charlotte's smile looked like it hurt. "Yes, of course." Ethan turned to Sophia, and for the first time his expression softened, just slightly. "You okay?" Sophia nodded. She didn't trust her voice yet. He reached out and gently took her right hand, turning it palm up. Her fingers were red from the cold, but that wasn't what he was looking at. He was looking at the calluses. Thick, rough patches on her fingertips and the side of her thumb, the kind that only came from thousands of hours holding a bow. Ethan lifted her hand higher, showing it to Charlotte, to the parents, watching, to everyone. "You see this?" he said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "This is what dedication looks like. Most people see dirt. Musicians see medals." Sophia stared at him. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't fix anything. Ethan let go of her hand and nodded to his assistant. "Count the money, all of it." The assistant knelt down with the shoebox, sorting bills on the floor while everyone watched. Sophia stood there dripping, waiting, her heart pounding so hard she thought people could hear it. 2 minutes later, the assistant looked up. $240. Exact. Ethan turned to Charlotte. "Stamp her form." Charlotte's hand trembled as she picked up the stamp. She pressed it onto Sophia's registration paper, harder than necessary, the word "received" smearing slightly in red ink. "You're in," Ethan said to Sophia. "Preliminary round is in 3 days. Don't be late." "I won't," Sophia whispered. He nodded once, then walked away, his coat swaying behind him like a cape. Sophia stood there for a moment, staring at the stamped form in her hands. She'd done it. She was in. But as she turned to leave, she caught Charlotte's expression, a cold, calculating look that promised this wasn't over. Sophia didn't care. She tucked the form into her jacket, picked up her battered violin case, and walked back out into the rain. She had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to prove she belonged here. 3 days to save her mother's life. The rain followed her all the way home, but Sophia barely noticed. She replayed the moment over and over in her head, the way Ethan had stopped Charlotte, the way he'd held up her hand like it was something to be proud of. No one had ever done that before. By the time she reached her apartment building, the rain had soaked through her jacket completely. The building was old, the kind with flickering hallway lights and stairs that creaked under your weight. Sophia climbed to the 3rd floor, unlocked the door with a key she kept on a shoelace around her neck, and stepped inside. The apartment was silent, cold. The heat had been shut off 2 months ago. Sophia set her violin case on the kitchen table, the only table they had, and peeled off her wet jacket. Underneath her shirt was damp, clinging to her skin. She ignored it. She'd been colder. She opened the violin case carefully, like she was opening a treasure chest. Inside was the instrument her mother had given her 3 years ago. It was old, the wood dark and scarred with a crack along the side that had been glued and re-glued so many times it looked like a lightning bolt. But the sound it made. Sophia picked it up, weighing it in her hands. It was heavier than most student violins, denser. The wood was real old-growth spruce, her mother had said. Expensive. The kind of violin that shouldn't be in the hands of a 10-year-old living in a place like this. But it was hers, and she would never let it go. She rosined the bow, tightened the strings, and began to play. Not a song, just scales. Up and down, over and over, until her fingers remembered where to go without thinking. Her mother used to say that scales were like breathing. You didn't think about it, you just did it. Sophia played until her fingers ached, until the apartment didn't feel so cold anymore, until she could almost forget that tomorrow she'd have to go back to the hospital and see her mother lying in that bed, getting smaller every day. Almost, but not quite. She set the violin down carefully and looked at the poster taped to the wall, a flyer for the competition. First place, $75,000, and a full scholarship to the National Youth Orchestra. $75,000, enough to pay for the surgery, enough to give her mother a chance. Sophia reached for a marker and wrote 2 words on the medical bracelet still wrapped around her wrist from yesterday's hospital visit. For Mom. Then she picked up her violin and played until the sun came up. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Sophia pushed through the double doors on the 4th floor, carrying a plastic container of rice and vegetables she'd made that morning. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The nurses knew her by name now. They didn't ask why a 10-year-old was visiting alone anymore. They just buzzed her through with sympathetic smiles that made Sophia's stomach twist. Room 447, end of the hall. Her mother was asleep when Sophia walked in. Diane Bennett looked smaller every time Sophia saw her, like she was slowly disappearing into the white hospital sheets. Her hair, once thick and dark like Sophia's, had fallen out in patches from the chemo. What remained was covered by a soft blue cap Sophia had bought with money from playing violin on street corners last summer. Sophia set the container on the bedside table next to the pill bottles and the IV stand and the stack of medical bills that kept growing like weeds. She tried not to look at them, but her eyes always found the top one anyway. The bill was stamped in red third notice, $68,000. Payment required immediately, $68,000. The number had been burned into Sophia's brain for months now. She knew exactly what it meant: 3 rounds of chemotherapy, 2 emergency room visits, 1 ambulance ride, and the consultation with the oncologist who'd looked at her mother's charts and said the word surgery like it was a maybe instead of a promise. Sophia sat down in the plastic chair beside the bed. It was the same chair she'd slept in dozens of times when her mother's pain got too bad, and Sophia refused to leave. The armrests were cracked. The cushion had a permanent dent in it shaped like her body. She pulled out her violin case and set it on her lap. The case was battered, held together with duct tape and prayers, but what was inside that was different. Sophia opened it carefully like she was opening a treasure chest. The violin lay nestled in faded red velvet, its dark wood gleaming even in the harsh hospital light. It was old, really old, the kind of old that meant it had been played by someone who knew what they were doing. The wood was spruce, old-growth spruce, her mother had told her years ago, and the grain ran in perfect tight lines along the body. The varnish had worn away in places from decades of hands holding it, playing it, loving it. But the sound it made when Sophia played, God, the sound! There was a crack running along the right side near the bridge, a long, jagged line that had been glued and re-glued so many times the repair looked like a scar. Sophia ran her finger along it, feeling the ridges where the wood didn't quite match up anymore. Her mother had told her the story of this violin so many times that Sophia could recite it like a bedtime story. 11 years ago, before Sophia was born, her mother had been a backup violinist in a small regional orchestra. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make her famous, but she'd loved it, and that's where she'd met him. A young conductor, brilliant, ambitious, hungry for success, in a way that made him electric to be around. He was 24, Diane was 23. They fell in love the way musicians do, fast, intense, and completely impractical. He bought this violin with money he didn't have, scraped together from teaching lessons and playing weddings, and one time selling his car so he could afford the down payment. He'd told Diane that a real musician needed a real instrument, that you couldn't make beautiful music with something cheap. Then Diane got pregnant. She'd been terrified to tell him. They weren't married. They barely had enough money to eat, but she'd hoped that maybe he'd be happy, that maybe they could figure it out together. He wasn't happy. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just went very quiet, and then he said he needed to think. 3 days later, Diane came home to find the apartment empty. He'd taken his clothes, his sheet music, his conductor's baton. He'd left the violin on the kitchen table with a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't do this." Diane never heard from him again. She'd kept the violin, though, hidden it in the back of her closet for years, unable to look at it without crying. But when Sophia turned 7 and started showing interest in music, Diane had pulled it out, dusted it off, and handed it to her daughter. "This belonged to someone who didn't know how to love," Diane had said. "But you can change that. You can make it mean something good." Sophia had been playing it ever since. She lifted the violin now, holding it up to the dim light coming through the hospital window. The crack caught the light, making the glue shimmer like gold. Sophia wondered not for the first time if her father ever thought about them, if he ever wondered what happened to the woman he left behind, if he even remembered her mother's name. Probably not. People like that, people who could walk away from their own blood, they didn't look back. They didn't regret. They just kept moving forward, chasing whatever dream was more important than the people they left in the dust. Sophia shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. It didn't matter. He was gone. Her mother was here. And Sophia had 3 days to get ready for the preliminary round of the competition that could save her mother's life. She stood up, leaned over, and kissed her mother's forehead. Diane didn't wake. Her breathing was slow and steady, the kind of deep sleep that came from exhaustion and too many painkillers. Sophia picked up her violin case and headed for the door. She had a practice spot in the hospital, not a good one, but it was private, and that was all that mattered. The storage closet was in the basement tucked behind the laundry room, where industrial washing machines churned loads of hospital linens 24 hours a day. It smelled like bleach and hot metal, and the single light bulb overhead buzzed like an angry wasp. But it was quiet, and nobody bothered her here. Sophia had discovered the closet 6 months ago, back when her mother's treatments first started, and Sophia needed somewhere to practice that wasn't their freezing apartment or the noisy street corner where drunk people shouted requests for "Freebird." She squeezed herself between a shelf stacked with industrial soap bottles and a metal rack holding mops and brooms. There was just enough room for her to stand with the violin as long as she didn't move her bow too wide. Sophia rosined her bow, a ritual she never skipped, and tightened the strings on her violin. The E string was getting worn. She'd need to replace it soon, but strings cost money, and money was something Sophia didn't have. She lifted the violin to her shoulder, positioned her chin on the rest, and closed her eyes. The piece she'd chosen for the preliminary round was a variation on a Bach partita. Most kids her age wouldn't touch Bach. It was too hard, too precise, too unforgiving. But Sophia had learned that the hard pieces were the ones that mattered, the ones that made judges sit up and pay attention. She'd added her own modifications, though. Moments where the melody broke apart became jagged and raw, like someone gasping for air. Then she'd pull it back together softer and sadder, like a lullaby sung to a dying child. It wasn't traditional. It probably wasn't what the judges wanted, but it was honest. And Sophia had learned that honesty was the only thing she had left to give. She started playing. The first note came out shaky. Her hands were cold, and the basement was even colder than the rest of the hospital. But by the second measure, her fingers remembered what to do. They flew across the strings, finding the right positions by muscle memory alone. Sophia played the opening movement 3 times, trying to smooth out the transition into the second section. It felt clunky, rushed, like she was trying too hard to get to the good part. She stopped, adjusted her grip on the bow, and tried again. Better. She played through the entire piece twice more, marking the spots where she stumbled, making mental notes about where to add more vibrato, where to pull back, where to let the silence speak for itself. By the time she finished, her fingers were bleeding. Just a little tiny red dots where the strings had pressed into her calluses, hard enough to break the skin. Sophia wiped them on her jeans and kept playing. She didn't stop until a janitor knocked on the door and told her it was past visiting hours. Sophia checked her phone. It was almost midnight. She packed up her violin, thanked the janitor, and headed out into the night. The walk home took 40 minutes. Sophia knew every street, every shortcut, every dark alley to avoid. She kept her head down, her violin case pressed tight against her chest, and walked fast. Their apartment building was at the edge of the city, in a neighborhood where the streetlights only worked half the time, and people didn't ask questions about why a 10-year-old was walking alone after midnight. Sophia climbed the 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for 2 years, and unlocked the door with the key she kept on a shoelace around her neck. The apartment was dark, cold, silent. Sophia didn't bother turning on the lights. She knew where everything was by memory. She set her violin case on the kitchen table, peeled off her jacket, and went to the corner of the room where her mattress lay directly on the floor. No bed frame, no box spring, just a mattress with a thin blanket and a pillow that had lost most of its stuffing. But before she lay down, Sophia did what she did every night. She walked over to the wall and stared at the poster she'd taped up 3 months ago. It was a flyer for the competition. Bold letters across the top, National Youth Classical Music Competition, and underneath in smaller print, first place prize $75,000 plus full scholarship to National Youth Orchestra, $75,000. Enough to pay for her mother's surgery, enough to cover the past due bills. Enough to buy them time. Sophia reached for the marker sitting on the windowsill and uncapped it. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the medical bracelet still wrapped around her wrist from yesterday's hospital visit. They always made her wear one when she stayed past regular hours. She wrote 2 words across the white plastic band in thick black letters, for Mom. Then she capped the marker, set it down, and stared at the competition flyer again. 3 days until the preliminary round, 72 hours. 4,320 minutes. Sophia lay down on her mattress, pulled the thin blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She just ran through the piece in her head over and over until the sun came up, and it was time to practice again. 3 days later, Sophia stood in the backstage hallway of the Grand Concert Hall, watching through a crack in the velvet curtain as contestant number 38 finished his performance. He was good. Really good. A 12-year-old boy in a navy blue suit that fit him like it had been tailored specifically for this moment. He played a Mozart concerto with the kind of technical precision that made it sound easy. Every note was clean. Every phrase was perfectly measured. When he finished, the audience clapped politely, and the judges gave him high marks across the board. Sophia's stomach twisted into knots. She was next. Contestant number 45, the last performance of the preliminary round. She flexed her fingers, trying to warm them up. The backstage area wasn't heated. Something about preserving the instruments in storage, and Sophia's thin sweater wasn't doing much to keep out the cold. Her hands felt stiff, clumsy. She opened her violin case one more time just to check. The instrument was fine. The strings were tuned. The bow was rosined. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for one thing. Number 45, a stagehand called out. He was a college-aged kid with a clipboard and a headset, probably a volunteer. "You're up in 2 minutes." Sophia stood up, slinging her violin case over her shoulder. "Okay." The stagehand looked her up and down, taking in her worn jeans, her second-hand sweater with a small hole near the hem, her scuffed sneakers that were half a size too small. His expression flickered with something Sophia had seen 1,000 times before, pity mixed with doubt. "You know you need an accompanist, right?" he asked. "Piano backup. It's required for your piece." "I know," Sophia said. "I submitted the request 3 weeks ago." The stagehand frowned and checked his clipboard. He flipped through several pages, his frown deepening. I don't see anyone listed here for you." Sophia's heart stopped. "What?" "Your accompanist. They're not on the schedule." "That's not possible. I filled out the form. Look, I'm just telling you what's on the sheet." The stagehand tapped his clipboard. "No accompanist listed, and according to competition rules, you can't perform without one." Sophia stared at him. "So what am I supposed to do?" He shrugged. "Reschedule for next year, I guess. Or find someone in the next 90 seconds. Next year. Like her mother had a year. Like Sophia had time to wait 12 more months while the medical bills piled higher and her mother got sicker, and the chance to save her slipped further and further away. "That's not fair," Sophia said. Her voice came out louder than she intended. "I did everything right. I followed the rules." "Hey, don't shoot the messenger, kid. I just work here." The stagehand walked away, leaving Sophia standing alone in the hallway. Her mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. But she didn't have time to fall apart. Sophia pushed through the curtain and walked onto the stage. The lights hit her like a physical force. Bright, hot, blinding. Sophia squinted her eyes, adjusting slowly to the glare of the follow spot, tracking her across the stage. The audience was a dark mass beyond the lights, hundreds of people she couldn't see but could definitely feel watching her. At the far end of the stage sat a grand piano, black, polished, beautiful, and completely empty. No one sitting at the bench, no sheet music on the stand. Sophia walked to center stage and stopped. The silence was deafening. At the judges' table 20 feet away, Charlotte Morrison leaned forward. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and pearls, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her look even more severe than usual. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Sophia caught the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "Contestant number 45, Charlotte said, her voice amplified by the microphone in front of her. "Where is your piano accompanist?" Sophia's throat felt like sandpaper. "I don't know. I requested one, but they told me backstage that I'm going to stop you right there." Charlotte held up one perfectly manicured hand. "Competition rules clearly state that all preliminary round performances must include the required instrumental accompaniment. No exceptions." She tapped her pen against the table. "Since you don't have an accompanist, I'm afraid you're unable to perform. You're disqualified." The word hit Sophia like a slap. "Disqualified," the audience murmured. Whispers rippled through the hall. Sophia heard fragments of conversations. "Poor thing. Should have been more prepared. What a shame." Charlotte waved her hand dismissively. "Please exit the stage so we can move on to the awards ceremony." Sophia stood frozen. Her violin hung from her right hand, heavy as an anchor. This was it. Over. Done. 3 months of practice, 3 years of dreaming, 10 years of fighting to survive, all for nothing. She couldn't move. Her feet felt glued to the floor. Charlotte's voice sharpened. "Contestant 45, you're dismissed. Exit the stage now." And then Sophia heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the back of the auditorium. Everyone turned. Ethan Cole was walking down the center aisle. He moved with the kind of confidence that made people instinctively step aside, even though the aisle was already clear. His dark coat billowed slightly as he walked, and his expression was carved from stone. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't acknowledge the whispers that started up immediately. "That's Ethan Cole. What's he doing?" He just walked straight to the judges' table. Charlotte stood up, her face going pale. "Maestro Cole, what are you?" Ethan reached the table and stopped. Without a word, he pulled off his expensive watch, a Swiss piece that probably cost more than Sophia's entire competition fee, and set it down on the table with a soft click that somehow carried across the entire hall. Then he took off his jacket, draped it carefully over the back of his chair, and rolled up his sleeves. The hall went dead silent. "She needs an accompanist," Ethan said. His voice was calm, steady, final. "I'll play." The audience erupted in whispers. Charlotte's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't. You're a judge. It's a conflict of interest. The rules clearly." "Then remove me from the panel for this performance." Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "But she's going to play. Maestro Cole, I must insist." "Charlotte." Ethan's eyes locked onto hers. The girl followed the rules. She submitted her request on time. If the administration failed to assign her an accompanist, that's not her fault. And I will not stand here and watch you disqualify a talented young musician because of an administrative error. He paused. "Unless you'd like me to call the competition board right now and explain what happened." Charlotte's face flushed red. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But she didn't say anything. Ethan took that as permission. He turned and walked toward the stage, climbing the steps in 3 long strides. He crossed to the grand piano, sat down at the bench, and adjusted it slightly. Then he cracked his knuckles, once a quick practiced motion, and looked at Sophia. "What piece are you playing?" Sophia's brain had completely short-circuited. Ethan Cole, the Ethan Cole world-renowned conductor guest judge, living legend, was sitting at a piano. For her. Her voice came out as a squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "It's a variation on a Bach partita, but I added some original sections that—" "Just start," Ethan said. His voice was kind now, gentle. "I'll follow you. Trust me." Sophia lifted her violin to her shoulder. Her hands were shaking not from cold this time, but from adrenaline and fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. She positioned the bow on the strings, took a deep breath, and played the first note. The sound cut through the hall like a knife. It wasn't pretty at first. It was raw, jagged, the kind of sound that made people sit up and pay attention whether they wanted to or not. Sophia played the opening phrase exactly as she'd practiced, fast, aggressive, with sharp staccato notes that sounded almost angry. Then she softened, just for a moment, letting the melody breathe before diving back into the intensity. Behind her, Ethan's piano came in, gentle at first, supportive. He wasn't trying to lead or dominate. He was lifting her up, giving her a foundation to build on. Sophia closed her eyes and let the music take over. She played the second movement faster than she'd practiced it, her fingers flying across the strings. The notes came out jagged and broken, like someone crying for help, like someone drowning and fighting to reach the surface. Then she pulled them back together, weaving the melody into something softer, something sadder, something that sounded like hope struggling to survive. Ethan matched her every step. When she sped up, he sped up. When she slowed down, he slowed down. His hands moved across the piano keys with effortless grace, finding harmonies that Sophia hadn't even known were there. It was like they'd been playing together for years instead of seconds. At the climax of the piece, Sophia leaned into the high notes, her whole body swaying with the music. She bit her bottom lip, a habit she didn't even know she had, and furrowed her left eyebrow in concentration. At the piano, Ethan's hands froze for half a second. That expression, that exact expression. He'd seen it in the mirror 1,000 times when he played. The same unconscious gesture, the same physical tell. But his hands kept moving. His training wouldn't let him stop. Sophia pushed through the final phrase, her bow trembling as she held the last note. It rang out across the hall, clear and pure and heartbreaking, and then it faded into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the audience exploded. People jumped to their feet. They clapped. They cheered. Some of them were crying. Sophia lowered her violin, her chest heaving, and turned to look at Ethan. He was staring at her. Not smiling, not applauding, just staring like he'd seen a ghost. At the judges' table, the other 2 judges were already holding up their scorecards. 9.8, 9.7. Charlotte sat frozen, her pen hovering over her scorecard. Her jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. The entire hall was watching her waiting. She looked at the audience. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Sophia. Then slowly she flipped her scorecard around. 9.6. Sophia had passed to the finals. 2 days later, Sophia was back at the hospital. It was late afternoon, and the light coming through the window of room 447 was golden and tired, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. Diane was awake this time, sitting propped up against pillows that the nurses had arranged to help her breathe easier. She was picking at a tray of food Jell-O applesauce crackers that she hadn't really touched. Eating had become more of a suggestion than an actual activity. "You made it through," Diane said when Sophia walked in. Her voice was hoarse and thin, but there was unmistakable pride in it. "I knew you would." Sophia sat down in her usual chair. "Barely. They tried to kick me out. But they didn't, because someone helped me." Sophia hesitated, unsure how much to say. "The guest judge, Ethan Cole. When my accompanist didn't show up, he played piano for me, in front of everyone." The change in Diane's face was subtle but immediate. Her fingers stopped moving. Her eyes went distant, like she was looking at something far away. "Ethan Cole," she repeated softly. "Yeah, do you know him?" Diane looked away, her fingers twisting the edge of the thin hospital blanket. "I used to, a long time ago." Before Sophia could ask what that meant, before she could push for details about the man who'd saved her performance and defended her twice. Now her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and unlocked the screen. There was a new email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line made her stomach drop. "Subject competition disqualification notice." Sophia's hand started shaking. She opened the email. "Dear Miss Bennett, it has come to our attention that you have violated Section 7.3 of the National Youth Classical Music Competition Ethics Code, which prohibits contestants from posting copyrighted musical performances on public platforms without proper licensing or permission from rights holders. Our review has identified a YouTube channel registered under your name containing multiple videos of copyrighted musical compositions performed without authorization. This constitutes a clear violation of professional ethics standards. As a result, your preliminary round score has been voided, and you are hereby disqualified from all further participation in this year's competition. This decision is final and cannot be appealed. Sincerely, Competition Administration Committee." The phone slipped from Sophia's fingers and clattered to the floor. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "Sophia." Diane tried to sit up straighter, wincing from the effort. "What's wrong? What happened?" Sophia couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing her lungs. "They kicked me out. They said I violated the ethics code because I posted videos on YouTube last year. I was just trying to make money. I didn't know it was against the rules. I didn't." Her voice broke. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to hold back the tears that were already streaming down her cheeks. This couldn't be happening. She'd made it through. She'd survived Charlotte's first attempt to destroy her. She'd played well enough to advance to the finals. And now, 2 days before the biggest performance of her life, they were taking it all away. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Sophia sobbed. "I tried. I really tried. But it's over." Diane reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed Sophia's wrist. Her grip was weak but desperate. "Listen to me. You haven't lost yet." "Yes, I have. I'm disqualified. It's done." "No." Diane's eyes were fierce despite her physical frailty. "You need to find Ethan. Right now." Sophia looked up confused. "Why would he help me? He already did enough. He's just a judge. He can't?" "Sophia." Diane's voice cracked. "Ethan isn't just a judge." Something in her mother's tone made Sophia go still. The tears stopped. The panic receded just enough for her to focus on what her mother was about to say. Diane's eyes filled with tears. "That violin you play, the one I gave you when you were 7, it belonged to him. He left it behind when he walked away from us 11 years ago." The room tilted. Sophia stared at her mother. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying..." Diane took a shaky breath. "Ethan Cole is your father." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sophia's brain couldn't process them, couldn't make them make sense. Ethan Cole, the man who'd defended her at registration, who'd held up her calloused hands like they were medals, who'd sat at a piano and played for her when no one else would. That man was her father. "He doesn't know." Diane continued, speaking quickly now, like she was afraid she'd lose her courage. "I never told him I was pregnant. After he left, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. I was too angry, too hurt. And then you were born, and I convinced myself we were better off without him." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But right now, he's the only person with enough power to protect you. Go find him. Tell him what happened. He'll fix this." Sophia sat frozen, trying to absorb what she'd just heard. Her father. The father she'd never known, never asked about, because she'd learned early that the topic made her mother cry. He'd been there all along, defending her, protecting her, not knowing who she was. "Go," Diane urged. "Before it's too late." Sophia stood up on shaky legs. She picked up her phone from the floor, kissed her mother's forehead, and ran. The Grandview Hotel was downtown, 20 minutes away by bus. Sophia didn't take the bus. She ran. By the time she reached the lobby, she was soaking wet again. It was raining because of course it was, and her lungs felt like they were on fire. She burst through the revolving doors, dripping water onto the marble floor, and looked wildly around. There, by the elevators. Ethan was standing near the bank of elevators, his phone pressed to his ear, his coat draped over one arm. He looked like he was about to leave. "Mr. Cole!" Sophia shouted. He turned, surprised. "Sophia!" She ran across the lobby, nearly slipping on the wet floor, and skidded to a stop in front of him. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. "They disqualified me," she gasped, shoving the phone toward him. "Look, they said I violated the ethics code, but I didn't mean to. I didn't know posting those videos was wrong. I just needed the money, and Ethan took the phone from her trembling hands and read the email. His expression darkened with every line. "Charlotte," he muttered under his breath. "Can you fix it?" Sophia's voice cracked. "Please, I need this competition. My mom needs the prize money for her surgery. I can't lose this. I can't—" "Stop." Ethan handed her phone back. His voice was calm, steady. "I'll handle it." He pulled out his own phone, scrolled through his contacts, and hit dial. Then he put the call on speaker and held it between them. It rang twice. "Ethan." Charlotte's voice came through smooth and honeyed. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the act, Charlotte. I just saw the disqualification notice you sent to Sophia Bennett." There was a pause. Then, "I don't know what you're implying, but that decision came from the ethics committee, not from me personally." "Right, the ethics committee you chair." Another pause. "If you want to play the copyright enforcement game," Ethan continued, his voice dropping into something cold and dangerous, "then let's talk about Vienna. Last year, the International Young Musicians Showcase, your son Julian's original composition that won third place." Silence on the other end. "Turns out," Ethan said, "that piece was built on an unlicensed beat sampled from an independent electronic artist. I still have the emails from the original composer asking why he wasn't credited. I'm sure the press would love to hear about the Morrison family's approach to artistic integrity and copyright law." The silence stretched longer. "You have 5 minutes to send a retraction," Ethan said. "Tell the committee there is an administrative error, reinstate Sophia's eligibility, or tomorrow morning I make some calls to friends at the Times and the Journal." "You wouldn't dare. Try me." He ended the call. Sophia stared at him, her heart pounding. "Will that actually work?" Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and showed it to Sophia. A new email from Charlotte. Subject line urgent. Administrative error correction. Dear Miss Bennett, upon further review, we have determined that there was an error in the application of Section 7.3 to your case. The Ethics Committee has reversed its decision. Your preliminary round score stands and you remain eligible for the finals. We apologize for any confusion. Sincerely, Competition Administration Committee. Sophia's knees almost gave out. Relief washed over her so powerfully that she had to grab the edge of a nearby chair to stay upright. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. There was a question in his eyes, something he wanted to ask, but didn't know how. "You're going to be fine," he said finally. "Just focus on the finals. Play the way you played in the preliminary round and you'll win." Sophia nodded, but she couldn't stop staring at him. This man, her father, he didn't know. He had no idea, and she didn't know if she should tell him. 1 week later, Sophia stood backstage at the Grand Concert Hall, staring at a white box that had been delivered to her dressing room an hour ago. There was no name on the delivery slip, no return address, just her contestant number 45 written in neat handwriting on a label stuck to the top. Sophia opened it carefully, half expecting it to be a mistake. Inside was a dress. Not just any dress. A deep blue velvet gown with long sleeves and a hem that would fall just below her knees. Simple, but elegant. The kind of dress that looked expensive without being showy. The fabric was soft under her fingers, and when she held it up to the light, it seemed to glow. Beneath the dress, wrapped in tissue paper, was a bow. Sophia lifted it out carefully, her breath catching in her throat. It was a professional-grade Pernambuco bow, the kind that cost thousands of dollars. The wood was perfectly balanced, smooth, and rich in color, and the horsehair looked like it had been hand-selected by a master craftsman. There was no card, no note, but Sophia knew exactly who it was from. She put on the dress. It fit perfectly, like someone had measured her without her knowing. She picked up the new bow, tested its weight, and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in her life, she looked like she belonged here. Julian Morrison performed first. He walked onto the stage in a tailored black suit, carrying a violin that probably cost more than a car. His posture was perfect. His bow hold was textbook. When he started playing, every note came out clean and precise, like a recording. He played a Paganini Caprice, technically one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire, and he nailed it. Every double stop, every harmonic, every lightning-fast run up and down the fingerboard, flawless. When he finished, the audience applauded politely. The judges gave him high scores 9.3, 9.5, 9.4, but there was no fire in it, no soul. Julian had played the notes perfectly, but he hadn't said anything with them. Then it was Sophia's turn. She walked onto the stage in her blue velvet dress, carrying her scarred violin and the new bow. The follow spot tracked her to center stage, and the audience fell silent. Sophia lifted the violin to her shoulder, closed her eyes, and began to play. The piece was called Stand Up. It was a modern composition, a symphony of survival. It started soft, almost fragile, like a single voice calling out in the dark. The melody was uncertain at first, wavering, like it might break at any moment. Then it began to grow. Sophia moved with the music. She swayed. She stepped forward and back across the stage. She wasn't just playing the violin, she was living inside it. The instrument was an extension of her body, her voice, her heart. The melody shifted from sadness to anger. Her bow flew across the strings in sharp, aggressive strokes, staccato notes that sounded like a heartbeat, like someone getting knocked down and then getting back up, over and over, refusing to stay down. In the audience, Ethan sat frozen in his seat. His eyes were locked on the violin in Sophia's hands. He'd been watching her play, mesmerized by the raw emotion pouring out of her when something caught his attention. The crack. That jagged line running along the side of the violin, glued and re-glued until it looked like a scar. Ethan leaned forward, his heart starting to pound. He knew that crack. He'd been the one who made it. 12 years ago, when he was still a struggling conductor trying to make a name for himself, he'd dropped the violin while moving apartments. The corner had hit the edge of a table and the wood had split. He'd taken it to 3 different repair shops before finding someone willing to fix it, and even then the crack had never fully disappeared. That was his violin, the one he'd bought when he was 22, the one he'd left behind when he walked away from Diane, which meant Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Sophia, really looked at her, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The way she moved when she played, the way she bit her lip during the high notes, the way she furrowed her left eyebrow when she concentrated, all of it. Every gesture, every expression. He'd seen those same movements in the mirror 1,000 times. Oh God, this was his daughter. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. He pressed one hand to his mouth, trying to hold back the sob that was rising in his throat. He had a daughter, a 10-year-old daughter who was standing on that stage playing the violin he'd abandoned, fighting for her life with more courage and strength than he'd ever had. And he'd walked away from her before she was even born. What kind of person did that? What kind of man left his own child and never looked back? A coward, that's who. Ethan's hands were shaking. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't try to wipe them away. On stage, Sophia pulled the bow across the strings one final time, leaning into the high E note with everything she had. The note rang through the hall like a bell, clear and powerful and heartbreaking. And then, with perfect timing, the final strand of horsehair on the bow snapped. Sophia didn't flinch. She lifted the broken bow high above her head, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with defiance. The audience erupted. People jumped to their feet. They screamed. They clapped so hard it sounded like thunder. Some of them were crying. All of them knew they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. The judges' scores came up one by one. 10.0, 10.0. Even Charlotte had no choice. 10, 0, perfect. Sophia lowered the violin and looked out into the audience. She searched the sea of faces until she found him. Ethan. Sitting in the third row, tears streaming down his face, their eyes met, and for the first time Sophia saw her father crying for her. The chaos backstage after Sophia's performance was overwhelming. Journalists crowded around, cameras flashing. Officials tried to organize the awards ceremony. Other contestants and their parents pushed through the hallways, some congratulating Sophia, others looking at her with barely concealed envy. Sophia barely heard any of it. She clutched her violin case against her chest like a shield and moved through the crowd in a daze. Her mind was still on that stage, on that final note, on the moment she'd locked eyes with Ethan and seen him crying. He knew. She was certain of it now. He'd figured it out. A stagehand touched her shoulder. "Miss Bennett, they need you in the green room for the awards presentation in 15 minutes. Sophia nodded but didn't really process the words. She just kept walking, letting muscle memory guide her through the maze of hallways until she found herself near the back exit, the one that led to the parking garage. That's where she saw them. Her mother was there sitting in a wheelchair that the hospital had finally agreed to lend them for the day. A nurse stood behind the chair, checking her watch like she was worried about how long this was taking. Diane looked tiny in the wheelchair, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the warmth of the building, but her eyes were bright, alive, proud, and standing in front of them, hands shoved deep in his pockets, was Ethan. Sophia's steps slowed. She should interrupt. She should walk over there and join them. But something made her hang back just for a moment, watching. Ethan wasn't looking at Diane. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders tense, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words and failing. Then slowly, he lifted his head and looked at Diane. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was raw, broken. "I'm so sorry." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, I was a coward." The words came out in a rush like he'd been holding them back for years. "I was 24 years old and terrified of anything that might derail my career. When you told me you were pregnant, all I could think about was how it would change everything, how it would slow me down, how I wouldn't be able to take the conducting positions I wanted, wouldn't be able to travel, wouldn't be able to focus on music the way I needed to." He dragged a hand through his hair, his face twisted with regret. "So I ran. I told myself you'd be better off without me, that the baby would be better off without me. I told myself I was doing you a favor by leaving." He laughed bitterly. "But I was just doing myself a favor. I was choosing my own ambition over the people I should have loved." Diane wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "You didn't know what kind of man you'd become. You were young. That's not an excuse." Ethan's voice was firm. "I had a choice, and I made the wrong one. And now," he looked toward the hallway where Sophia had disappeared, "now I have a daughter who doesn't even know me, a daughter who's been fighting battles I should have been there for, who's been taking care of you when I should have been taking care of both of you." "She's strong," Diane said softly, "stronger than either of us." "I know." Ethan's voice cracked. "I saw it today, on that stage. She's incredible." He paused. "She looks like you. She has your talent. She has your courage." They fell silent for a moment. The nurse shifted uncomfortably, clearly feeling like she was intruding on something private. Finally, Ethan straightened his shoulders. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope and a folded piece of paper. "I can't change the past," he said, "but I can try to help with the future." He held out the envelope to Diane. "This is a bank confirmation. I paid off all your medical bills this morning. Everything. The surgery you need, the treatments, the medications, it's all covered for the next 5 years. Diane stared at the envelope like it might disappear if she touched it. "Ethan, that's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can. And you will." His voice was gentle, but left no room for argument. "Sophia is about to win $75,000 from this competition. She shouldn't have to spend it on medical bills. She should get to use it for her future, for her education, for her music." Diane took the envelope with shaking hands. She opened it and read the bank confirmation letter inside. Her eyes widened. "This is..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She just looked up at Ethan, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." Ethan nodded. Then he took a deep breath and turned toward the hallway, as if sensing that Sophia was there. She was. She'd been standing in the shadows, listening to every word. Now she stepped forward into the light. Ethan's breath caught when he saw her. She was still wearing the blue velvet dress, still holding her violin case, still looking like the strongest, bravest person he'd ever met. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Ethan did something Sophia didn't expect. He knelt down. Not on both knees, that would have been too dramatic, but he went down on one knee, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture of respect and humility. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "I know." Sophia's voice was steady, calm. "You're my father." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if the words physically hurt to hear. "Yes, I am. And I'm so sorry that—" "Mom told me a few days ago," Sophia interrupted, "after you saved me from being disqualified the first time." Ethan opened his eyes. "She did?" "Yeah." Sophia shifted her violin case to her other hand. "She said you were the only one who could help me, and she was right. You did help me, twice. I should have been helping you your whole life." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. "I should have been there when you were born, when you took your first steps, when you played your first note on that violin. I should have been the one teaching you, protecting you, making sure you never had to worry about money or medical bills or whether you belong somewhere." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. "But you weren't," she said finally. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan flinched. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to want me in your life, but I want you to know that I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be the father I should have been from the beginning." Sophia studied his face. She saw the regret there, the guilt, the desperate hope that maybe somehow he could make up for 10 years of absence. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to yell and scream and tell him that sorry wasn't good enough, that he'd missed everything important, that he'd left her and her mother to struggle alone while he built his perfect career. But another part of her, a bigger part, remembered the way he'd stood up for her at registration, the way he'd held up her calloused hands like they were something to be proud of, the way he'd walked onto that stage and played piano for her when no one else would. He hadn't known she was his daughter then. He'd just seen a kid who needed help, and he'd helped her. That had to mean something. Sophia took a deep breath. She could feel her mother watching from the wheelchair, waiting to see what she would do. "I need to tell you something too," Sophia said. Her voice was calm, measured. "Thank you for protecting me from Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for saving me when they tried to disqualify me. Thank you for paying for Mom's surgery." She paused. "I'll be grateful for those things for the rest of my life." Ethan's face flickered with hope, but Sophia wasn't finished. "But Dad is someone who teaches their kid how to ride a bike, who makes breakfast when they're hungry, who sits with them when they're sick, who tucks them in at night and tells them they're going to be okay." Her voice didn't waver. "You haven't done those things? So right now you're not my dad. You're just Ethan." The hope in Ethan's eyes crumbled. He looked like he'd been struck, but he didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. He just nodded, slowly accepting the judgment. "You're right," he said hoarsely. "I haven't earned that title." Sophia adjusted her grip on her violin case. Then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She held out her right hand, the one with the calluses that Ethan had praised in front of everyone. "We can start over," she said. "We can be friends first, and maybe if you really try someday, you can be more than that." She kept her hand extended. "I'm Sophia. It's nice to meet you." Ethan stared at her outstretched hand. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he didn't bother to hide them. He looked at Sophia, this incredible, strong, forgiving child that he didn't deserve, and felt his heart break and heal at the same time. He reached out and took her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, the grip of someone who'd learned to shake hands with the world on her own terms. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice shaking. "It's an honor to meet you, Sophia." They shook hands, formal, polite, like two strangers meeting for the first time. But it was a beginning. Behind them, Diane wiped tears from her eyes and smiled. The nurse, who'd been trying very hard to pretend she wasn't witnessing something profound, quietly blew her nose. "You need to get to the awards ceremony," Ethan said, finally releasing Sophia's hand. "They're going to call you up on stage soon." Sophia nodded. She glanced at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Will you be there?" Sophia asked Ethan. "In the audience?" "Front row," Ethan promised. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Sophia allowed herself a small smile. Then she turned and walked back toward the green room, her blue dress swishing around her legs, her violin case bumping gently against her hip. Ethan watched her go, his heart full of pride and regret in equal measure. When she disappeared around the corner, he turned back to Diane. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For raising her to be better than me." Diane reached out and took his hand. "You have time now. Don't waste it." "I won't," Ethan said. And he meant it. The awards ceremony was exactly the kind of spectacle Sophia had expected. Bright lights, formal speeches, a lot of important-looking people saying important-sounding things. She stood on stage with the other finalists, her hands clasped behind her back, trying to focus on what the head judge was saying, but mostly just wanting it to be over. Julian Morrison stood next to her, his face carefully neutral, but his jaw tight. Charlotte sat in the front row of the judges section, her expression unreadable behind a mask of professional composure. And the winner of this year's National Youth Classical Music Competition, the announcer said, drawing out the moment with practiced dramatic timing with a unanimous perfect score, is contestant number 45, Sophia Bennett. The audience erupted in applause. Sophia's knees went weak with relief. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The head judge handed her an oversized check, the kind they used for photo opportunities, and a trophy that was heavier than it looked. Cameras flashed. People cheered. Someone handed her a bouquet of flowers that was almost as big as she was. Sophia smiled, for the cameras shook hands with the judges, including Charlotte, whose handshake was ice cold and lasted exactly 1 second and said all the right things when they pushed a microphone in her face. How does it feel to win? Amazing. Surreal. What are you going to do with the prize money? Help my mom. And keep playing music. Who would you like to thank? Sophia paused. She looked out into the audience and found Ethan sitting in the front row, watching her with an expression she was starting to recognize. Pride mixed with regret. Hope mixed with uncertainty. I'd like to thank everyone who believed in me, she said carefully, especially the people who gave me a chance when I didn't look like I belonged. It was vague enough to be diplomatic, but specific enough that Ethan would know she was talking about him. She saw him nod slightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the lobby. Fancy appetizers that Sophia didn't recognize, and sparkling cider in plastic champagne flutes. Representatives from music schools approached her with business cards and scholarship offers. A journalist from a classical music magazine asked if she'd be willing to do an interview. Sophia handled it all with the same calm confidence she'd shown on stage, but inside she was exhausted, overwhelmed, ready to go home. Except she didn't really have a home to go back to. Just a cold apartment with a mattress on the floor and medical bills that, thanks to Ethan, weren't a problem anymore. She was standing by the window, taking a break from the crowds when Ethan approached. He'd changed out of his formal concert attire into dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked more relaxed, more human. "Hey," he said softly, "congratulations. That was incredible. Doesn't even begin to cover it." "Thanks." Sophia turned to face him. "Thanks for being there. It helped, knowing you were in the audience." Ethan nodded. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with something he wanted to say, but didn't know how to start. "Listen," he said finally, "I know we agreed to start as friends. And I meant what I said. I'm going to respect whatever boundaries you need, but I want you to know something." He took a breath. "After I left the hospital today, I hired a private investigator." Sophia blinked. "What?" "I had to be sure," Ethan said quickly. "Not because I doubted your mother, I didn't, but because I needed to verify everything before I could fully accept it." The investigator confirmed that the timeline matches. The hospital records from when you were born match the dates Diane and I were together. And there were some other details photos from that time, a few witnesses who remembered us that corroborated everything. He pulled out his phone and showed Sophia a document. It was an official-looking report with dates, locations, and a conclusion highlighted at the bottom. Paternity claims substantiated with 99.7% certainty pending DNA confirmation. "I'm not asking you to take a DNA test," Ethan said quickly, "unless you want to, but I needed to do my due diligence. I needed to be responsible this time instead of just running away or making assumptions." He put his phone away. "You are my daughter. There's no doubt in my mind now." Sophia studied his face. She appreciated that he'd been thorough, that he hadn't just accepted everything at face value. It showed he was taking this seriously. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay. Yeah. I'm glad you made sure. It's better that way." Ethan looked relieved. "I also want you to know that I've already contacted my lawyer. I'm going to set up a trust fund for you, separate from the competition winnings, for your education, your music training, whatever you need. And I'm going to make sure your mother has everything she needs for her recovery. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Ethan's voice was firm but kind. "Not because I'm trying to buy your affection or make up for the past with money, but because it's my responsibility, Because it's what a father should do, even if I haven't earned that title yet. Sophia nodded slowly. Okay, thank you. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the reception continue around them. People laughed and clinked glasses and congratulated each other. It all felt very far away. Can I ask you something? Sophia said. Anything. Why did you help me at registration, I mean? Before you knew who I was? Ethan thought about that for a moment. Because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself when I was young. That hunger, that determination. And I saw the way Charlotte was trying to crush it before you even had a chance to begin. He met her eyes. I've spent my whole career in classical music. I've seen too many talented kids get pushed out because they didn't have the right connections or the right background. I couldn't let that happen to you, even though I was a stranger. Especially because you were a stranger, because nobody else was going to stand up for you. He paused. I wish someone had done that for me when I was starting out. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Sophia considered that. You became one of the best conductors in the country. Things turned out pretty well for you. Professionally, yes. But personally, Ethan shook his head. I sacrificed everything for my career. I hurt people. I made choices I'll regret for the rest of my life. He looked at her. Success isn't worth much if you're alone at the end of it. You're not alone now, Sophia said quietly. Ethan's eyes welled up again. No, I'm not. He cleared his throat, trying to pull himself together. Listen, I know you need time. I know I can't just walk into your life and expect everything to be okay. But I want to be here. For you and your mother. Whatever that looks like. What does that mean practically? Sophia asked. She wasn't being difficult. She genuinely wanted to understand. It means I want to be involved in your life, not as some distant benefactor who sends checks and shows up once a year, but as someone who's actually present. Ethan spoke carefully, like he was thinking through each word. I have a house about 20 minutes from here. It has a guest room that could be yours if you ever want to stay over. I could help with your music training, connect you with teachers, help you practice, take you to concerts. We could have dinner once a week, or more if you want, or less if that's too much. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking uncertain. I don't really know how to do this. I never had kids, well, I did. I just didn't know about you, and I don't have a blueprint for how to be a good father. But I want to try. I want to show up. I want to be someone you can count on. Sophia listened to all of this with a serious expression. She was only 10 years old, but she'd had to grow up fast. She knew how to read people, how to tell when someone was being genuine versus when they were just saying what they thought she wanted to hear. Ethan was being genuine. Okay, she said, let's try it. Dinner once a week to start. And maybe you could help me find a good violin teacher. The one I had before was okay, but she shrugged. I know someone, Ethan said immediately. One of the best in the country. She owes me a favor. I'll make the introduction. And I want Mom to be included in everything, Sophia added. This isn't just about you and me. She's been there my whole life. She doesn't get pushed aside now. Absolutely, Ethan agreed. She's remarkable. I owe her more than I can ever repay. But I'm going to try. Sophia held out her hand again the same way she had in the parking garage. Then we have a deal, Ethan. Let's see where this goes. Ethan took her hand and shook it solemnly. Deal. As they shook hands, a photographer from the local paper snapped a picture. Neither of them noticed. They were too focused on each other on this fragile new beginning they were building together. Across the room, Diane watched from her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. The nurse beside her offered a tissue, which Diane accepted gratefully. That's my girl, Diane whispered. So strong, so smart. She takes after her mother, the nurse said kindly. Diane shook her head. She's better than both of us. She's going to do incredible things. And watching Sophia stand there in her blue velvet dress, holding her trophy and shaking hands with the father she'd just met, Diane knew it was true. 1 year later, the grand concert hall looked different from this angle. Sophia had performed here before, had won the competition that changed her life on this very stage, but she'd never seen it from the wings quite like this. As a featured soloist with a full symphony orchestra, everything felt bigger, more important, more real. She stood in the darkness backstage, dressed in a white gown that Diane had helped her pick out last month. The dress was simple and elegant, with cap sleeves and a fitted bodice that made Sophia feel older than her 11 years. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore small pearl earrings, a gift from Ethan, for her 11th birthday 3 months ago. The past year had been complicated. Good, but complicated. True to his word, Ethan had shown up. Every week, without fail, he'd come to dinner at the new apartment. He'd help them move into a real apartment with heat and working appliances and bedrooms instead of just one room with a mattress on the floor. He'd connected Sophia with Clara Martinson, one of the most respected violin teachers in the country, who had agreed to take Sophia on as a student and had pushed her harder than anyone ever had before. The lessons had been brutal. Clara didn't care that Sophia was a competition winner. She'd torn apart Sophia's technique and rebuilt it from the ground up, fixing bad habits that Sophia hadn't even known she had. There had been tears. There had been moments when Sophia wanted to quit. But Ethan had been there through all of it, encouraging her, reminding her why she'd started playing in the first place. They'd also done normal things. Ethan had taught Sophia how to ride a bike in the park near his house. They'd gone to concerts together, not just classical music, but jazz and folk, and even a rock concert that had made Ethan wince at the volume, but had made Sophia laugh at his discomfort. He'd helped her with her math homework when she struggled. He'd made her breakfast terribly at first, but he'd gotten better and had slowly learned what she liked and didn't like. And bit by bit, week by week, he'd started to feel less like Ethan and more like, well, not quite Dad yet, but something close. Diane's recovery had been miraculous. The surgery had been successful, and the aggressive treatment plan that Ethan's money had made possible had put her cancer into remission. She'd regained weight. Her hair had grown back. She'd even started playing violin again. Nothing serious, just for fun. But it had made Sophia cry the first time she heard her mother play. Charlotte Morrison had quietly resigned from the competition board after a journalist started asking uncomfortable questions about ethics violations and conflicts of interest. Julian had continued competing, but had never recaptured the attention he'd gotten that year. The classical music world had moved on, as it always did, looking for the next prodigy, the next story, the next headline. And then 2 months ago, Ethan had asked Sophia if she wanted to be the featured soloist for the New England Symphony Orchestra's spring concert. It was a huge honor, the kind of opportunity that usually went to musicians twice her age. Sophia had said yes without hesitation. Now, standing backstage and listening to the orchestra tune their instruments, Sophia felt nervous for the first time in months. This wasn't a competition. There was no prize money on the line. This was about the music itself, about proving that she belonged here, not because of her story or her struggles, but because she was genuinely good. 5 minutes, a stagehand called out. Sophia took a deep breath. She opened her violin case, not the battered old case from last year, but a new one that Ethan had given her, though she still kept the old one in her closet, and lifted out her instrument. The violin was the same. The scarred, cracked, glued-together instrument that had belonged to Ethan, and then to Diane, and now to her. Clara had offered to help her find a newer, better violin, but Sophia had refused. This violin had history. It had survived abandonment and poverty and struggle, and it had come out the other side still capable of making beautiful music, just like her. She rosined her bow and did a few practice scales, warming up her fingers. The familiar motions calmed her nerves. "Hey!" Sophia turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, dressed in his formal conductor's attire, black tails, white bow tie hair slicked back. He looked every inch the maestro that the posters outside the concert hall proclaimed him to be, but his expression was soft, nervous even. "You ready?" he asked. "I think so," Sophia said. "Are you?" "Terrified," Ethan admitted with a slight smile. "I've conducted hundreds of concerts, but I've never conducted one where you were the soloist. I'm going to be watching you the whole time, which means I'm probably going to mess up my cues." Sophia laughed. "You'll be fine. You'll be better than fine. You'll be extraordinary." Ethan stepped closer. "Listen, I know we haven't talked about this, but I want you to know how proud I am of you. Not just because you're talented, though you are incredibly so, but because of who you are, how hard you work, how kind you are to your mother, how you've handled everything this year with so much grace." Sophia felt her throat tighten. "Thanks, Ethan." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you think, would it be okay if someday you called me something other than Ethan?" Sophia looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd shown up every week for a year, who'd helped her move, who'd paid for her mother's medical care without asking for anything in return, who'd taught her to ride a bike and made her terrible pancakes and sat through her practice sessions even when she played the same measure 40 times in a row, trying to get it right. "Maybe," she said softly. "Not yet, but maybe someday. Ethan's eyes shimmered, but he nodded. That's all I can ask for. 2 minutes, the stagehand called. Sophia and Ethan walked together toward the stage entrance. They could hear the audience settling into their seats, the murmur of hundreds of conversations creating a low hum that vibrated through the building. At the edge of the stage, Ethan stopped and turned to face her. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to hug her, but wasn't sure if he was allowed to yet. Sophia made the decision for him. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist in a quick, tight hug. Ethan froze for half a second, then carefully put his arms around her, holding her like she was made of glass. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, "for everything." "Thank you for giving me a chance," Ethan whispered back. They separated and Sophia wiped her eyes quickly, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Okay," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Let's do this. Let's make beautiful music," Ethan agreed. The lights came up on stage. Ethan walked out first to thunderous applause. He bowed to the audience, then turned to the orchestra and raised his baton. The musicians lifted their instruments ready. Then Sophia walked onto the stage. The applause grew even louder. She could see Diane in the front row, sitting in a regular seat now, instead of a wheelchair, dressed in a beautiful green dress and beaming with pride. Next to her sat Clara, Sophia's teacher, who gave her an encouraging nod. Sophia took her position at center stage. She lifted her violin to her shoulder and positioned her bow on the strings. She looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. And then, without words, just a slight nod and a shared understanding that had grown over a year of dinners and lessons and slowly building trust, they began. The piece they were performing was a violin concerto, soaring, emotional, technically demanding. But Sophia wasn't thinking about the technical aspects anymore. She was thinking about the story the music was telling. It started with loneliness, a single violin voice crying out in the darkness, searching for something it had lost. Then the orchestra came in, surrounding that lonely voice with warmth and support. Not drowning it out, but lifting it up, giving it a foundation to build on. As Sophia played, she thought about her journey, about the cold apartment and the hospital visits and the competition that had changed everything, about her mother's strength and Ethan's return and the slow, difficult process of building a family from broken pieces. The music shifted from sadness to hope, from struggle to triumph, from loneliness to connection. Sophia moved across the stage as she played, her body swaying with the music. She was no longer the scared 10-year-old in a too-big jacket standing in the rain. She was a young musician finding her voice and her place in the world. Ethan conducted with his eyes locked on Sophia, his baton movements perfectly synchronized with her bow strokes. They weren't just musician and conductor anymore. They were father and daughter, learning how to make beautiful music together. The final movement built to a crescendo. Sophia poured everything she had into the last phrase, all the pain and joy and fear and hope of the past year. The high notes soared through the concert hall, clear and pure and powerful. And then, with perfect timing, she and Ethan ended together. The final note hung in the air for one perfect moment. Silence. Then the audience exploded. People jumped to their feet. They cheered. They clapped until their hands hurt. Some of them were crying. Sophia lowered her violin and looked at Ethan. He was smiling at her, not the careful, uncertain smile she'd gotten used to, but a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger than his years. He held out his hand to her, inviting her to take a bow with him. Sophia walked over and took his hand. They bowed together, their hands clasped tight. In that moment, with the audience cheering and her mother crying happy tears in the front row, and Ethan's hand warm and solid in hers, Sophia finally understood something important. Family wasn't just about blood. It wasn't just about being there from the beginning. It was about showing up, about doing the work, about choosing to love someone even when it was hard. As they straightened from their bow, Sophia squeezed Ethan's hand and whispered something so quietly that only he could hear it. "Thanks, Dad." Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. He didn't say anything he couldn't because his throat was too tight and his eyes were too blurred with tears, but he didn't need to. The music had said everything that needed to be said. They took another bow together as the audience continued to cheer. The orchestra stood and applauded. Diane waved from her seat, her face shining with joy. And somewhere in the wings, a stage manager made a note that this was the longest standing ovation the Grand Concert Hall had seen in 5 years. But Sophia wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about the dinner they'd planned for after the concert, her Ethan and her mother together at Ethan's house. She was thinking about the violin lessons she had next week, and the summer music camp Ethan had suggested she apply to. She was thinking about the future, about all the music she still had to learn and play and share with the world, and she was thinking about how sometimes the most beautiful melodies came from the most broken instruments. The applause continued. Sophia smiled and waved to the audience, her hand still clasped in her father's hand. Finally, she was exactly where she was supposed to be.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.